Enough, Chloe. The words ripped through the carefully orchestrated elegance of the bridal shower, shattering the delicate clinking of champagne flutes and the polite murmur of congratulatory chatter. Every perfectly coiffed head in the room swiveled towards me. Ava Miller, the sweet one, the agreeable one, the one who never raised her voice, let alone unleashed a verbal thunderclap that could silence a room full of politely gossiping relatives. My voice, amplified by a year's worth of simmering resentment and a lifetime of unspoken frustration, echoed in the stunned silence, raw, trembling, but undeniably resolute. My fiance, Daniel, standing beside me, his hand gripping mine with unexpected strength, mirrored my own shock, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning understanding. My sister, Chloe, the queen of Miller Grace, the architect of this picture perfect bridal shower, stood frozen mid sentence, a half smile plastered on her face, her perfectly manicured hand still elegantly poised midair, a tableau of frozen shock, of utter, unadulterated exposure. The champagne blush and ivory lace decor, Chloe's meticulously chosen color palette that now felt like a suffocating symbol of her control, seemed to mock me. The delicate floral arrangement suddenly oppressive, the soft lighting casting long, accusing shadows across the stunned faces of our family and friends. The air, once filled with the saccharine sweetness of bridal shower cheer, now crackled with unspoken tension, with the raw, exposed nerve of a long simmering family conflict, finally, explosively, erupting into the pristine surface of Miller Nice. Just moments before, I had been sweet Ava, the smiling, nodding, agreeable bride to be, politely accepting yet another exquisitely wrapped Chloe approved gift. Another perfectly crafted compliment about how lucky I was to have such a helpful and organized sister. Just moments before, I had been drowning in a sea of Miller niceness, suffocating under the weight of unspoken expectations and subtly enforced family hierarchies, playing my designated role in the carefully scripted performance of Miller Harmony. But something had snapped. Something had finally broken. Chloe's latest helpful suggestion, delivered with her signature honeyed condescension, a seemingly innocuous comment about how darling Daniel's family, bless their hearts, had such interesting taste in wedding attire, had been the final straw. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about a lifetime of subtle disrespect, of being perpetually underestimated, of having my voice silenced, my preferences ignored, my agency erased, all in the name of Miller niceness, all under the guise of family harmony. And in that moment, standing in the middle of my own bridal shower, surrounded by the stunned silence of my family and friends, I realized I could no longer play that role. I could no longer smile and nod and agree my way through a life that wasn't truly mine. I could no longer let Miller niece be synonymous with Miller doormat. It was time for Miller nice to roar. It was time for sweet Ava to finally, irrevocably find her voice. It was time for the truth, the raw, uncomfortable, family harmony shattering truth, to finally be spoken. To understand how we reached this explosive moment, this bridal shower turned battleground, we need to rewind back to the beginning, back to the carefully orchestrated chaos of wedding planning, back to the subtle, insidious ways Miller Grace and Miller Niceness had conspired to almost completely erase Ava from her own wedding, from her own life. Our family, the Millers, as I mentioned, were known for being agreeable. We were the human embodiments of beige wallpaper, the social equivalent of decaffeinated coffee, the very definition of inoffensive. Conflict was our kryptonite, confrontation our personal Everest, and making waves was considered the ultimate Miller family faux pas. Miller niceness, as I've come to call it with a healthy dose of sardonicism, was not just a family trait. It was a carefully cultivated performance, a social survival mechanism passed down through generations, a shield against any potential discomfort, any hint of disharmony, any whisper of individuality. And within this Miller Nice ecosystem, my older sister Chloe reigned supreme. Chloe was Miller Grace personified, a social chameleon who could navigate any situation with effortless charm. a master manipulator of polite conversation, a black belt in the subtle art of getting exactly what she wanted while appearing to be utterly selfless and helpful. She was the family's golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one whose opinions were always subtly elevated, whose preferences were always gently prioritized, whose helpfulness was always gratefully, unquestioningly accepted. And to me, Ava Miller, the younger sister, the sweet one, the agreeable one. I was the designated Miller nice enforcer, the family's emotional buffer, the one who smoothed ruffled feathers, deflected potential conflicts, and always smiled and nodded and agreed, even when my own inner voice was screaming in silent protest. My role was to be pleasant, to be accommodating, to be invisible if necessary, in order to maintain the precious facade of Miller harmony. When Daniel and I got engaged, the Miller family collective predictably and perhaps inevitably descended upon the wedding planning process with the well intentioned but ultimately suffocating force of a Miller nice tidal wave. My parents, bless their hearts, were thrilled, of course, but their thrilled was predictably filtered through the lens of Miller niceness. "Oh, Ava, darling, we're so happy for you," my mother had exclaimed, enveloping me in a hug that felt both warm and slightly controlling. "And Chloe has just volunteered to help with the wedding planning. Isn't that wonderful? She's just so organized and so good at these things. It will be such a help to you, dear. You're probably feeling so overwhelmed already, aren't you, sweet Ava?" And just like that, without even a moment's hesitation, without a single question asked about my vision, my preferences, my desires for my own wedding, Chloe was officially and unilaterally appointed as the wedding planning fairy godmother. And I, Ava, the sweet and agreeable bride to be, was gently, politely, but firmly relegated to the role of passive recipient of Chloe's helpfulness. Chloe, of course, embraced her self appointed role with characteristic Miller grace and unnerving efficiency. Wedding planning meetings were immediately scheduled. Pinterest boards were meticulously curated, by Chloe naturally, and spreadsheets were expertly constructed. Again, Chloe's domain, not mine. My opinions were politely solicited, of course, but Chloe's suggestions, delivered with her signature honeyed charm and an air of unshakable confidence, always, invariably, subtly, but effectively, steered the conversation back to her own predetermined vision of perfect Miller wedding perfection. The champagne blush and ivory lace color palette, the epitome of understated elegance in Chloe's impeccably tasteful mind, became the non negotiable foundation of our wedding aesthetic. The grand ballroom at the Miller approved country club, a venue that screamed traditional Miller wedding, from its crystal chandeliers to its perfectly manicured lawns, was unilaterally booked, despite Daniel and my whispered desires for something a little less country club and a little more us. Even the wedding cake, a detail I had actually dared to express a preference for, chocolate fudge, Daniel's and my shared favorite, was gently but firmly vetoed by Chloe in favor of a more sophisticated vanilla bean confection, adorned with, you guessed it, champagne blush and ivory lace sugar flowers. Daniel, bless his increasingly bewildered and frustrated heart, tried to interject, tried to offer his own opinions, tried to gently push back against the Chloe dominated wedding planning juggernaut, but his efforts were consistently, politely, but utterly effectively neutralized by Chloe's weaponized Miller grace. "Oh, Daniel, darling," Chloe would purr, her voice dripping with honeyed condescension. "That's such a sweet idea. So creative. But for a Miller wedding, darling, we really need to think about timelessness, elegance, tradition. Don't you agree, Ava, darling?" And I, sweet Ava, predictably, would nod and smile and agree, effectively silencing Daniel and reinforcing Chloe's unchallenged authority, all in the name of Miller harmony and avoiding any potential wedding planning friction. My parents, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the subtle power dynamics at play, seeing only Chloe's helpfulness and my agreeableness, and interpreting Daniel's quiet frustration as, well, as nothing at all, really? In the Miller family narrative, as long as everyone was smiling politely and no voices were raised, everything was by definition nice, and therefore perfectly fine. But beneath the Miller nice facade, beneath the carefully orchestrated wedding planning charade, resentment was simmering, frustration was building, and sweet Ava was slowly, agonizingly starting to feel like she was disappearing altogether, erased by the relentless tide of Miller grace and Miller niceness, swallowed whole by the champagne blush and ivory lace perfection of Chloe's wedding vision. And then came the bridal shower, the final, exquisitely orchestrated, Chloe approved, Miller nice nail in the coffin of my own wedding vision. Held at the perfectly charming Miller Family Country Club, decorated in, you guessed it, champagne blush and ivory lace, filled with Miller approved guests and meticulously planned down to the last perfectly tied ribbon and politely murmured compliment. The bridal shower was Chloe's masterpiece, the culmination of her months long campaign to transform my wedding into her vision of Miller wedding perfection. And as I sat there, sweet Ava, smiling and nodding and agreeing, politely accepting yet another champagne blush and ivory lace themed gift, listening to Chloe's honeyed pronouncements about how thrilled she was to be helping me with my special day, a slow, cold anger began to coil within me, a quiet, simmering resentment that was finally, irrevocably reaching its boiling point. It wasn't just the wedding anymore. It was the lifetime of Miller niceness, the years of being sweet Ava, the decades of having my voice silenced, my preferences ignored, my agency erased, all in the name of family harmony. It was the subtle, insidious disrespect, the constant underestimation, the unspoken assumption that sweet Ava was nothing more than a passive recipient of other people's visions, other people's plans, other people's lives. And Chloe's latest helpful suggestion, delivered with that perfectly practiced blend of honeyed charm and condescending dismissal, the comment about Daniel's family's interesting taste in wedding attire was the spark that finally ignited the simmering resentment, the final straw that broke the Miller Nice camel's back. Oh, and Ava, darling, Chloe had purred, leaning closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, loud enough for half the room to hear. You might want to gently guide Daniel's family on their attire choices for the wedding, darling. Just a tiny suggestion, of course. But you know, darling, Millers are known for their classic elegance. And well, Daniel's family, bless their hearts, are perhaps a tad more eclectic in their sartorial sensibilities. Wouldn't you agree, darling? That was it. That was the moment. The moment when sweet Ava finally irrevocably snapped. The moment when Miller niceness finally explosively transformed into Miller strength. The moment when I, Ava Miller, the agreeable one, the sweet one, the one who never raised her voice, finally roared. Enough, Chloe. The words ripped through the room, shattering the champagne blush and ivory lace facade of Miller wedding perfection, exposing the raw, uncomfortable truth that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. And in that stunned silence, in the shocked faces of my family and friends, in the frozen tableau of Chloe's exposed control, I knew with a certainty that resonated deep within my newly awakened Miller strong soul that sweet Ava was finally irrevocably gone. And in her place, standing tall, voice trembling but resolute, was simply Ava Miller, finally, truly, and unapologetically herself.